When it comes to fruit, blood sugar problems and type 2 diabetes, it's a very difficult field to navigate because there are healthy fruits to eat, but there are way more unhealthy fruits you definitely should avoid if you have blood sugar problems or type 2 diabetes. And to make it even worse, there's a large gray area where people don't really know whether a fruit should or should not be eaten if you have blood sugar problems and type 2 diabetes. Fortunately, I'm going to help you out with this. I'm Ali from Illness Free Life, and in this video you'll learn 11 healthy fruit options you could choose if you have blood sugar problems and type 2 diabetes. Before I give you the list, it's good to discuss some practical information, and that's how we made this list. We used 3 criteria to choose the healthy fruits: the amount of carbohydrates and sugars per unit of weight, the amount of dietary fibers per unit of weight, and how practical it is to eat the fruit. And when it comes to the amounts of fruits you should eat every day, always remember that you should stick to 2 pieces of fruit if they're quite large, or 2 portions of fruit if the fruit is relatively small. So when we're talking about large fruit, think of an apple, and small fruits, think of berries. It's a bit sad if you just eat 2 berries. That's why we say 2 portions of berries. And the reason you should stick to 2 pieces or 2 portions is that fruit does contain carbohydrates and sugars. Yes, it can be healthy because it also contains a lot of dietary fiber, but still it's a product that in general contains a lot of sugars, a lot of carbohydrates, and yes, it can contain some vitamins and antioxidants and whatnot, but at the end of the day, all these vitamins and antioxidants can also be gotten from, for example, vegetables, which in general contain way less carbohydrates and sugars per unit of weight, and in general way more dietary fibers. So fruits should never really be a cornerstone of your diet, but just a tasty extra you eat from time to time or in moderation. But now let's go to the list. Option 1, apples. Apples contain around 13% carbohydrates and sugars and around 2% dietary fibers. This makes apples okay to eat. They're not great as a fruit group, but they're definitely not bad as a fruit group. And because most people like apples and it's very practical to eat apples and take them along with you, it's definitely a good option to have. When it comes to apples, there are 2 things to consider. 1, if you eat an apple, definitely eat it with the skin attached, because the skin contains a lot of dietary fibers. And apples desperately need these dietary fibers to balance out the amount of carbohydrates and sugars they contain per unit of weight. And the more sour an apple tastes, the healthier it is. So a Granny Smith apple is in general the best option you could choose when it comes to apples. But apples are all tasty and all healthy. It's just choosing between healthy and healthier. So the more sour an apple tastes, the healthier it is. As far as I know, there are no wrong or bad choices to make when eating apples, so don't get too hung up on which apple to choose and just pick whatever type of apple you like. If you, by the way, want to know what makes fruit in general healthy or unhealthy, it's good to watch a previous video I made about fruit. Click here, link of that video is also in the description of this video. Option 2, strawberries. Strawberries contain around 5% carbohydrates and sugars and around 1% dietary fiber. This makes strawberry, contrary to maybe popular belief, okay to eat if you have blood sugar problems and type 2 diabetes. They're not great, they're in the same area as apples, but they're definitely not bad or unhealthy, which is a surprise to most people because they tend to think that strawberries are very sweet. And although they might taste sweet, they're actually not very rich in carbohydrates or sugars. So if you like eating strawberries, definitely eat them, but keep it at the 2 portions per day. And preferably even less, because strawberries do contain somewhat high amounts of carbohydrates and sugars per unit of weight and relatively low amounts of dietary fibers. They're still okay to eat if you have blood sugar problems and type 2 diabetes, but they're not the best option to choose. What you definitely should avoid is, like how some people like to eat their strawberries, is strawberries with table sugar on top of them to make them even sweeter. Of course, although the strawberries are healthy, table sugar is definitely not healthy and will make the strawberries way worse. Option 3, avocado. Avocado contains around 1.8% carbohydrates and sugars and around 3.1% dietary fibers, which is of course great news, because as soon as you find a product that contains more dietary fibers per unit of weight than carbohydrates and sugars, you always have a very healthy thing in your hands. And avocado is definitely not an exception. Although most people consider avocado to be a vegetable, it's actually a fruit, and a very healthy one. It contains little to no carbohydrates and sugars, it contains okay amounts of dietary fibers, but what it contains a lot of are very healthy fats. And the benefit of fats is that they don't raise your blood sugar levels or worsen your type 2 diabetes. If they do anything to your type 2 diabetes, is make it better, because fats have no influence on your blood sugar or insulin. And if you combine fats with other nutrients, they tend to slow the absorption rate of those nutrients, which is good when it comes to carbohydrates and sugars, and they tend to lower the amount of carbohydrates and sugars you absorb from a meal in general, which is of course also good if you have blood sugar problems and type 2 diabetes. When it comes to avocado, you could not eat too much of them. So if you like to eat them as you like, whether you put them on low carb bread or you just spoon them from the shell, it's all healthy to eat. And you can eat unlimited amounts of them and still be healthy. Option 4, raspberries. Raspberries contain around 4.5% carbohydrates and sugars and 2.5% dietary fibers. This is an excellent ratio between carbohydrates and sugars and dietary fibers, and makes raspberry one of the best things you could eat for your body, blood sugar and type 2 diabetes. An extra bonus is that raspberries contain a lot of healthy antioxidants, which is definitely something you need in your life. In general, antioxidants tend to improve insulin resistance, which is always good news if you have blood sugar problems or type 2 diabetes, which is mainly caused by an increase in insulin resistance. The antioxidants in raspberries can lower this insulin resistance. But don't go overboard, stick to the 2 portions per day rule, because it still contains carbohydrates and sugars, and if you eat too much of them, then they can influence your blood sugar and type 2 diabetes in a negative way. Option 5, coconut. Coconut contains around 3.5% carbohydrates and sugars and around 9% dietary fibers. Again, an option with more dietary fibers per unit of weight than carbohydrates and sugars. And again, that means it's a very healthy product to eat. Which is surprising, because little to no tropical fruits are actually healthy to eat. A lot of them contain high amounts of carbohydrates and sugars, which isn't ideal, and often low amounts of dietary fibers, which is definitely not ideal. Coconut is the opposite. It contains relatively low amounts of carbohydrates and sugars, which is good, but high amounts of dietary fibers, which is great. Again, like avocado, you can eat as much coconut as you want a day. It's one of the healthiest products in general to eat, regardless of it being a fruit or not. So have at it. And one of the benefits of coconut is also that it contains high amounts of fats, which is always a good thing. And it tends to contain high amounts of vitamins and minerals, which is always a good thing to have in your diet. So if you have access to coconut, eat it, enjoy it, because it's one of the best things you could eat. Quick, before we continue with the rest of the list, do you like this video and want to receive more of these videos? Don't forget to give us a like and subscribe for free to this YouTube channel. That way you'll never miss a video we publish, and you'll help us reach more people to improve their blood sugar and type 2 diabetes. And now back to the rest of the video. Option 6, blueberries. Blueberries contain around 11% carbohydrates and sugars and around 2.5% dietary fibers. This makes them okay to eat. They're not great, but they're definitely not bad. And when you consider that blueberries contain high amounts of healthy antioxidants, then it makes it a very healthy thing to eat if you have blood sugar problems and type 2 diabetes and want to eat healthy fruits. Again, because of the relatively high carbohydrate content and sugar content, don't go overboard with the amount you eat a day. Stick to the 2 portions, and then blueberries are definitely a healthy thing to eat. Option 7, blackberries. Blackberries contain around 5% carbohydrates and sugars and around 3% dietary fibers, which gives them a better ratio than blueberries. More often than not, if you find a berry, it's often a healthy thing to eat if you have blood sugar problems and type 2 diabetes. The only difference is the berry good, great, or the best thing since sliced bread? And when it comes to blackberries, they're definitely one of the healthier options to choose within the berry family. So if you have access to blackberries, enjoy them, but also here, stick to the 2 portions a day rule. Option 8, tomatoes. Tomatoes contain around 4% carbohydrates and sugars and around 2% dietary fibers. And although most people consider tomato to be a vegetable, it's actually a fruit, and a healthy fruit when it comes to that. It has relatively low amounts of carbohydrates and sugars and okay amounts of dietary fibers, especially in that ratio. So if you like eating tomatoes, you can definitely eat them as a fruit. It's a very healthy thing to eat, and there are no drawbacks as far as your blood sugar or type 2 diabetes. Option 9, oranges. Oranges contain around 8% carbohydrates and sugars and around 2% dietary fibers. This again falls in the it's okay category, but it's not great category, because 8% is relatively high when it comes to carbohydrates and sugars, and when compared to the dietary fiber amount, which is only 2%, it makes oranges not great. But oranges are worldwide relatively freely available, and most people tend to like them, and they're relatively practical to eat. So if you like eating oranges, it's fine to eat. It's not bad, it's not great, it's just okay to eat. And again, stick to the 2 pieces per day rule, especially when considering the okay fruits, which contain high amounts of carbohydrates and sugars and relative low amounts of dietary fibers. Option 10, cranberries. Cranberries contain around 11% carbohydrates and sugars and around 4.5% dietary fibers, which makes them a pretty okay thing to eat. The more sour the cranberries taste, the healthier they are. And when it comes to cranberries, you want to eat the actual whole berry and not the dried one. Because when it comes to fruit, the liquid and water inside the fruits is actually one of the most important elements of the fruit. Water also limits the amount of sugars and carbohydrates you absorb, and it slows down the rate with which this happens. Plus, it is an agent that usually saturates us pretty okay. If you remove the water by drying the fruit, you are able to eat way more cranberries than when you eat fresh ones. The result of this, of course, is that you eat a lot of carbohydrates and sugars. Now, you will also eat a lot of dietary fibers, because a berry is still a berry, but eventually this will impact your blood sugar and type 2 diabetes in a wrong way, because the amount of sugars and carbohydrates you've eaten in a small amount of time are extremely high when it comes to dried fruit. So eat cranberries, but eat fresh, whole cranberries, and of course not the variations that are coated in sugar for some strange reason. You often only see this with the dried variation, but again, when it comes to fruit, they contain enough carbohydrates and sugars as they are. You don't need extra sugar put on top of them, even if it's a very sour cranberry. If you think it's very sour and need sugar to eat it, then just avoid cranberry in general, because apparently it's not your fruit to eat. Option 11, kiwi. Kiwi contains around 11% carbohydrates and sugars and around 2.5% dietary fibers. This makes it an okay option to eat. Again, it's like apples and oranges. It's not great, but it's definitely not unhealthy or bad for blood sugars and type 2 diabetes. When it comes to kiwi, it's important to eat the green one and not the gold one, because the gold one contains more carbohydrates and sugars per unit of weight, which isn't good, and it contains less dietary fibers, which isn't good, but the combination is, of course, not good at all. The ratios are thus way off when it comes to the gold kiwi, but when it comes to the green kiwi, it's an okay. The more sour the green kiwi tastes, the better it is, because it will contain less carbohydrates and sugars, and it tends to contain more dietary fibers. but if it tastes somewhat sweet, it's okay to eat. Just avoid the ultra sweet, ripe green kiwis because those will contain, relatively speaking to their sour counterpart, more carbohydrates and sugars per unit of weight, which isn't ideal, and lower amount of dietary fibers, which is of course not ideal. Other than that, green kiwis are definitely okay to eat. These were the 11 healthy options of fruit you have if you have blood sugar problems and type 2 diabetes. If you want to learn more healthy fruit options, you can find a link to an article on our website in the description of the video. There you'll learn more about healthy fruits and blood sugar problems and type 2 diabetes. And if you're there anyway, don't forget to subscribe for free to our Diabetes Free Secret. This is a small document we give away in which we teach you the main causes of blood sugar problems and type 2 diabetes and what you can do to prevent, improve and fully reverse these problems with healthy nutrition. Link for this document is also in the description of this video. If you have any questions about this subject, please leave a comment down below and I'll see you in the next video.